This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, get ready, because today we're going deep on one of those decisions that really changed everything, the atomic bomb in World War II. It's August 1945, and the whole world is on edge. President Truman just announced that the U.S. has used this totally new kind of weapon.
Yeah, a weapon that literally changed the world in a flash.
Exactly. And today, we're going through this history lecture you found, looking at Truman's own words right after the Hiroshima bombing. He gives reasons, sure, but what's he really saying between the lines? Was this just a military move, or was there more to it?
That's a question historians have been wrestling with for ages. This lecture really digs into the different sides of Truman's thinking. On the surface, he's all about ending the war fast and saving lives, American and Japanese.
Yeah, that's right at the front of his statement. He calls Hiroshima a military base, trying to make it seem purely strategic. And then you've got the sheer scale of the destruction. We're talking like 20,000 tons of TNT. Makes you wonder if they were trying to just shock Japan into surrendering.
I think that's definitely part of it. But to get the full picture, you got to look at what was going on in the Pacific. This lecture talks about the Battle of Okinawa, which was brutal. The U.S. military was looking at maybe hundreds of thousands of casualties if they had to invade Japan. Truman was basically holding up that possible bloodbath to justify the bomb.
Chilling calculation, isn't it? Like, how many lives is one bomb worth?
But even with those military reasons, the lecture doesn't let us forget the Manhattan Project. This wasn't some weapon they just found lying around. This was a huge, top-secret science project costing billions of dollars. That has to mean something more than just ending the war quickly, right?
Absolutely. Think about it. Billions of dollars back in the 1940s? That tells you something right there. The sheer size of the Manhattan Project shows the bomb's symbolic power. Like America announcing its top dog in science, just as the world's stepping into the atomic age.
So it's about showing off their power as much as anything. Exactly. And you can't forget what was happening in the world. Remember, the Soviet Union was already becoming a big rival to the U.S. The lecture points out this subtle moment in Truman's statement that almost feels like he's talking directly to Stalin. You know, a not-so-subtle reminder of what America could do.
So the bomb was also a way to say, hey, we're in charge now.
Precisely. And this is where the historian PMS Blackett comes in. He argues, and the lecture makes this point too, that the atomic bombs weren't just about beating Japan. They were about setting up how the whole world would work after the war. The U.S. was putting itself in charge in this new, scary world, and that bomb was the ultimate power move.
Which makes you wonder how much Truman believed what he was saying about saving the Japanese people.
Right. And the lecture really pushes back on that. It makes us ask, was it really about saving Japanese lives? Or was it more about showing off to the Soviets and everyone else, like, don't mess with us?
Yeah. So we're going beyond the simple story we might have learned in school and seeing something much more complicated. It's not just military stuff. It's about power, ambition, and the world entering this scary atomic age.
And that's what makes this so interesting. We're not just looking at the past. We're facing questions that still matter today.
Feels like we're peeling back layers of an onion here. The more we dig, the more complicated it gets. We've got this official story about saving lives, but then there's the Manhattan Project and all this maneuvering with other countries. It's a lot.
Don't forget, we're looking at a statement written very carefully by a president who needed to justify a decision a lot of people even then thought was just wrong.
You're right. He's trying to make this horrifying weapon sound like, I don't know, a necessary evil and a sign of progress all at once. How does the lecture deal with that, the justifications and the ethical side of it all?
Well, it takes us back even further to the bombing campaigns in Europe and Japan. The firebombing of Dresden, the raids on Tokyo, those were already pushing the limits of what people thought was okay in war.
So the atomic bombs, even though they were way more destructive, they weren't totally out of line with what they were already doing, targeting civilians.
Exactly. And the lecture says that's super important to understanding how Truman was thinking. He was in a world where the line between military targets and cities, well, it was already blurred. So the atomic bombs, he might have seen them as just a faster way to get what they already wanted, Japan surrendering completely.
It's a scary thought that that level of destruction could seem like the next logical step in the war.
And remember, the bomb wasn't just brute force. It was also psychological, meant to break the Japanese spirit. The lecture points out this really powerful line from Truman where he talks about a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. He's not just describing Hiroshima, it's a threat, like surrender now or there's more coming.
He's playing for keeps, and that bomb's his winning hand.
You got it. And at that point, they had more bombs being made, even bigger ones, so it wasn't an empty threat. Truman was basically starting a new kind of war where the U.S. had the biggest stick.
It makes you think maybe those bombs, more than even the destruction they caused, became the real power play in the world after the war.
That's a sharp observation. And the lecture picks up on that, how the reasons they gave for using the bombs got mixed up with these bigger goals. It's not a simple good guys, bad guys situation.
It's more like a whole web of reasons, isn't it? Military needs, showing off their scientific skill, wanting to be the top dog in the world.
Exactly. And the lecture doesn't shy away from how messed up that is, ethically. It's asking us, even now, was using those bombs really the right thing to do? What did it mean for Japan in the long run? For the world? And even what it means for how we think about what it means to be human.
Those are some heavy questions and ones we can't just ignore. Sounds like this lecture is telling us to really think for ourselves, question what we've been told, and accept that history is complicated.
Exactly. It's about looking past simple explanations and dealing with how messy and complicated the decision to use the atomic bomb really was.
It's definitely not your typical World War II story. We're talking about these huge choices made under pressure, choices that we're still dealing with the effects of today.
Yeah, it's a whole tangle of ethical and strategic problems, that's for sure. And this lecture isn't saying it has all the answers. It's more like encouraging us to think for ourselves and see all the different sides of it.
It mentions this historian, Niall Ferguson. He talks about how science and the whole idea of total war got all mixed up. What's he getting at there?
Well, Ferguson's point is that during a conflict like World War II, something like the atomic bomb, it wasn't just a tool. It was tied up with all the political ideas floating around at the time. It's like science itself became part of the fight for who would rule the world.
So the bomb wasn't just about ending the war in Japan. It was about shaping what came next, about showing everyone who's boss in this new world.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Truman and his statement. He talks about how the bomb is going to bring in a new era of scientific understanding, even hints that atomic energy could be used for good things,
Almost like he's trying to balance the bad with the good, the horror of the bomb, with some hope for the future. Like he's saying, yeah, this is terrifying, but look what it could do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the lecture makes it clear that this whole back and forth, the destructive power, mixed with the potential, that's the heart of the whole atomic bomb issue.
And that issue's still around today, right? I mean, we're still arguing about nuclear weapons, and now there are even more destructive ones being developed.
Absolutely. And that's what we should really take away from this whole discussion. It's not just about something that happened in the past. It's about what it means for us as humans. Like, where's the line when it comes to science?
Yeah.
How do we balance wanting power with protecting people? These are things we all got to think about.
So after going through all of this, what can we, just regular people, take away from this deep dive into the atomic bomb?
I think the biggest thing is thinking critically. Don't just accept what you're told. Dig deeper. Try to understand what's really behind the choices people make, especially the ones that can change the world.
Because in a world where technology is always changing, what happened with the atomic bomb, that's more important than ever.
It really is. We're constantly making decisions that have consequences way beyond what we can imagine. This deep dive reminds us that we have to understand how much weight our choices carry, especially when they could shape the future. It's something we all inherit, this legacy, and we can't ignore it.
Something to think about for sure, but an important thought. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the decision to use the atomic bomb. Keep thinking about these complicated issues, question what you think you know, and talk to each other about the choices that are going to shape our future.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.